Hello, how is everyone? Welcome to, this is the first video I'm doing under the name Achtung Reviews. As it started, I'd call it quarantine because this whole thing started with me just doing something because I was a bit bored and wanted to, do something while we're all stuck inside, and I've actually really enjoyed doing it. That I've now set up a YouTube channel and a Facebook page and an Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff. Sorry. And this is the first video that will be on YouTube, hopefully. And then I'll go back and add all the old ones on later on. Let's get into today's review, which is Led Zeppelin. What better band to start off your first YouTube video, I guess, although considering the name you might want to start with U2, but I've already done U2. However, like I said, that video will be up at some point. Zeppelin, massive, hugely influential, not only on me, but you can throw a rock in a crowd and find someone who's been influenced by Zeppelin, especially musicians. Especially if you throw a rock into a crowd of musicians, you'll find anyone who loves Zeppelin and has been influenced by Led Zeppelin. For me, they're probably the biggest, most influential band after the Beatles. And yeah, I can't think of a bigger band than Zeppelin, and a band that's done so much but with such a short period of time. They were only a band for 12 years, and we got 9 albums, a couple of live albums, had a few other things get released since Zeppelin disbanded in 1980 due to the tragic death of John Bonham, which is a shame. But there's something I quite like the fact that you have these bands out there that sort of did their thing and they were of the time, but yet were timeless. I think there are some bands that have created timeless works, have kept going, and maybe have been a bit outdated. There's something about just having that short thing, like that's it there, and having a short discography or a short existence sort of leaves people wanting more, especially if you're this good. And that's why you see Jimmy Page recently re-released everything with these huge box set releases, which I'm yet to get all of them. I think I've only got 3. I think I've got Physical Graffiti, CODA, and PRISENCE. So I'm actually yet to get all those. However, I do have the 2 disc releases, and that's what I'm going to use to do my ranking today. So there are 9 Zeppelin albums. We go obviously 9 through to 1, and yeah, here we go. Hopefully this reaches more people than just my Facebook friends. Alright, in at number 9 is pretty obvious. I got CODA. Not really a Zeppelin album in the sense of a band creating an album. This is basically a bunch of outtakes thrown together as sort of like a goodbye sort of thing, which is why it's called CODA. This was released in '82, which came after John Bonham passed away, and Zeppelin said, okay, no more Zeppelin, but to sort of give the fans just sort of like one last sort of hurrah or one last sort of official goodbye, they gave us this, which has We're Gonna Groove, has I Can't Quit You Baby, which also featured on the first Zeppelin album, so which I think was just an outtake from the recording. You got Waltz's Walk. You got Bonzo's Matrix, which is a drum solo essentially. A nice little tribute to John Bonham. But I think We're Gonna Groove is probably the standout track, which is actually, and the recording of this is from the infamous Royal Albert Hall show, just with the audience taken out. So, yeah. So there you go, that's CODA, number 9. Number 8, In Through the Outdoor. Now this is the re-release. This is the one that came out 2015, was it? Yeah, 2015 when 2014-15 when all these reissues came out. When the album was released, you got it in this paper bag, and there are 6 different sleeves like this. It's basically the same thing: a bloke sitting in a bar stool with a sort of paint line going across it. But you can get it from 6 different angles, and the whole idea of the paper bag was you didn't know which angle you were going to get. I don't know if that was the same way for this model or not, so whether it just gave what they would consider to be the official cover, which I think it did. I think if you look at most Zepp albums, that's probably the official cover. Anyway, so it's cool, a bit of a thing for it. In Through the Outdoor. This was the first Zeppelin album where Jimmy Page was probably absent, which was very strange. Zeppelin, even though it is a great band, it is Jimmy Page's band, and just Jimmy Page started and he kept it rolling. He kept the images, and he basically moulded and shaped Zeppelin to how he wanted it to be seen and how he wanted it to go. And obviously he could do that with the help of manager Peter Grant. This is the first time where he was really absent. Jimmy Page was starting to get into a lot more of a harder drugs at this point. Bonzo was completely smashed drinking, so it was heavily drunk a lot at this time, which would end up going to kill him. And so it really fell in the hands of John Paul Jones and Robert Plant to really take this album and actually make it happen, which is why it's not very bluesy, riff driven like we've known Zeppelin in the past. It's very sort of soft and melodic, quite folky, which is sort of has a bit of more of Robert Plant's sort of background when he was into the hippie sort of folky stuff. But there's some really cool stuff on here. In the Evening, I like Fool in the Rain is the standout track with Bonzo's amazing drumming skills. And you've got All My Love, which is obviously lovely little ballad and a tribute to Robert Plant's son, who died of an infection in between this album and the album before this, which was Presence, I think. Yeah, Presence. So yeah, not of a departure from the Zeppelin we had known, and even as this album wrapped up and the tour for this wrapped up, Page and Bonham were talking about getting back to doing an album that was very riff driven, very riff based. I think when Jimmy Page actually heard the mix and what this album was like, I thought it kind of snapped him out of it a bit and went, okay, I'm sort of losing control of this band, let's get it back to the bluesy sort of heavy riff band that everyone loves. But sadly we never got that album because Bonham passed away. So yeah, there you go. In Through the Outdoor is my number 8. Now here we go. These albums are brilliant in their own way. So I get, and keep in mind this is my opinion. Like if you think any of those albums are in your top 2, good on you, but they're not for me. However, and the same goes for these. And I know I'll probably get some hate for this one because this album is loved by a lot of people, and I completely understand. But I think the other 6 albums are just better, I just like a lot more. That's why my number 7 is Houses of the Holy. And it absolutely pains me to say that that's coming at number 7. This is a fantastic album. I was listening to this last night just to go over and make any sort of last minute notes and stuff. Mentally, I don't have a sheet, anything around me, so this is all coming from my knowledge. I listened to it last night to make some sort of last minute mental notes, and I didn't end up doing it because I got lost in the music because I was having a great time listening to it. It was so good. The song remains the same. The Rain song, Over the Hills and Far Away, Dancing Days, Do You Make Her, No Quarter, of course, great legendary song. John Paul Jones on the Hammond, just creating some great stuff, and Jimmy Page adding his guitar skills and stuff to all that, and then of course Robert Plant's vocals and lyrics over the top, backed by Bonzo's drumming. And you got The Ocean, of course, great riff, great song. Just so many really cool songs. The only reason I think why I put this in is Robert Plant's voice. Robert Plant's voice sounds a bit sort of weary and whiny to me. I don't know why. It doesn't sound loud and bombastic as it did on the first 4 albums that came before this. Really sort of, I don't know whether it's just the way he sang it or whether it was just the way it was recorded. I just don't find his voice as great on this album as I do all these other albums. And frankly, as much as I enjoy this album, when I listen to it, I listen to the live versions more. I listen to the stuff off Song Remains the Same, especially for Over the Hills, Song Remains the Same, and the Rain song. I listen to the live versions more than I do the album versions. But yes, a really good album. I can't fault it really apart from that. But yet again, that's sort of a minor thing. That's just me being picky. So really, I really can't fault this album. So maybe I should have put it number 6. I don't know, but I find it hard to. Again, this album was a lot higher in my original ranking when I originally wrote down all of these and then began to listen to them and went, no, hang on, there are actually better albums than this album, but I can't put this album at in the bottom 3 because it had such an impact on me when I bought it, and I still love it and still listen to it a lot, and that is the debut album. Great record, one of the greatest debuts of all time. I don't think we saw a rock album debut and make this much of a bang until later on down the line when we got stuff like Appetite for Destruction and a couple of others that just made big impacts and really changed the aspect of rock music. Van Halen's debut album comes to mind as well, of debuts that just took rock and roll of the time and just completely flipped it, and suddenly everyone was playing before this, suddenly this comes out and everyone's trying to mimic and imitate and copy this, and that's what happened when Zeppelin 1 came out. You go on endless amounts of documentaries and you see a lot of people go, first time they heard the first song off this album, their life changed. And the first song off this album is Good Times, Bad Times, which is a great Zeppelin song. You got Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, You Shook Me, of the legendary Dazed and Confused, Black Mountain side of things. Communication Breakdown is still awesome. I Can't Quit You, Babe, and How Many More Times, and this is Zeppelin in their real bluesy prime, and they did borrow and sort of steal a lot of blues stuff, and there are some people that say, most unoriginal band because of that and stuff, they may have nicked things from blues artists and folk artists, but they completely changed them and made them their own. And you can't deny that. I know that More Times features is really just How Many More Years by Howlin' Wolf and The Hunter by Howlin' Wolf, just sort of combined with Jimmy, and they're sort of combined and connected through Jimmy Page solo and Robert Plant's scattering, sort of connected to. But you know, you can't deny it still blows you away, and it's still uniquely Zeppelin. Even though I know they did borrow it, it's still very much Zeppelin, and it is sort of original in its own way. But in a sense of who wrote the song, no, it's not original. It's very much comes from the old blues players. But you know, I'm kind of okay with that because this is an amazing record. So yeah, say what you want, but I love it. I still think it's amazing. Number 5, this album still blows me away. A lot of people, I think, would have had this in the bottom 3. I don't think this album gets enough credit for how good it is, and that is Presence. Again, I know a lot of people don't enjoy Robert Plant's vocals on this, including Robert Plant himself, because when this album was made, he was still recovering from a car accident he had. I think he was in a wheelchair for most of the recording of this album. But yeah, I think it's great. I think what happened with Houses of the Holy and Physical Graffiti and all that, Zeppelin sort of got lost in sort of these folky sort of experimentational sort of albums that I do love, don't get me wrong. I thought it was great that we got back to a really great guitar record, and you know, the title track, Achilles' Last Stand, I think is every guitarist's wet dream, and I'm a guitarist myself, so that includes me. You can't listen to Achilles' Last Stand, especially as a guitarist, and just not love it. And then you got, you know, the bluesy Nobody's Fault But Mine, which, you know, you got Robert Plant with the, I think, awesome harmonica solo. And you got T for One, which is, I think, Since I've Been Loving You Part 2, but yet again, comparing that, as much as it does feel like Part 2, I think it is its own song, but there are definitely some there's definitely a lot of similarities between T for One and Since I've Been Loving You. And then you got stuff like Royal Orleans, Candy Store Rock, Hots for Nowhere, which is very sort of in that style of early like 50s rock, stuff like Elvis and Chuck Berry sort of type songs. And then you got For Your Life, which awesome song. So again, I love this album. I think it's quite underrated, but you know, that's my opinion. Number 4, the highly criticised Zeppelin 3. It was, I think a lot of people have grown to it a lot now. However, I think a lot of people still dismiss it. And when you're talking about the first 4 Zeppelin albums, this often gets chucked down the bottom, which I think is a disservice to it, because I think it's fantastic. I know it's a lot more folkier and stuff, and there's a lot more of Jimmy Page on the acoustic guitar than on the electric, but that's fine. I think he's come up, some of the stuff he's come up with on acoustic, I think is, you know, brilliant, and some of it can compete with some of the stuff he's done on the electric, and especially on this album, something like Gallows Pole, or That's the Way. Those chords are very strange in the way he's playing them, and I read it in Mick Wall's book, When Giants Walk the Earth, that one day Robert Plant and Jimmy Page went walking through the bush, and Jimmy Page took a guitar with him and sat down, and they were sort of talking and stuff, and just through that, he sat down and just started playing the chords to That's the Way. And then Robert Plant started singing the melodies and stuff. And That's the Way, I think, is really cool. Definitely one of my favourites off the album. But given this is a lot of very much acoustic, it does come with the heavy riffed Immigrant Song, which I think to a lot of people for this album would probably just buy this album just to get that song, and maybe not pay much attention to the rest of the album, which I'm not going to lie, I did when I bought this album. It took me a while to actually get into this album. And then, of course, got Since I've Been Loving You, which is, Jimmy Page getting to really show off his bluesy guitar skills, and just shows you what a great lead player he is. And when you listen to him play lead, you can hear 1,000 other lead guitar players in that song and in his playing. What else is on here? You got Celebration Day, Out on the Tiles, very riff-like, very much in that sort of earlier Zeppelin vein. Then of course you got the Pinwheel cover here, which you can So yeah, I think it's a really great record, and when you talk about great Zeppelin albums, it should not be left out. Because I do remember late last year I was having a conversation with someone who was absolutely hammering this album, and I sort of kept going, no, it's great, you love it, and I encouraged them to go back and listen to it again and say, no, just listen to it, don't go, oh, it's Zeppelin on acoustic as opposed to big heavy rock songs. Just go back and listen to it. It's really great material on here, and I hope that they did, but and I think I was just talking to them while we were lined up for a concert. So what was that? That was my number 4. So my number 3 is Physical Graffiti. Legendary album. It's got Zeppelin's longest track, studio track. Some of the live stuff surpasses this, but in My Time of Dying, which is also one of my favourite Zeppelin tracks. You got Custard Pie, The Rover, Kashmir, of course, is probably the big song off this album. Bron Ra, I love, which I think there are quite a few of these songs on here that are leftovers from other albums. So Bron Ra is from it's just Bron Ra. He's from obviously a leftover from Zeppelin 3. I think Kashmir was a leftover from around the time of Zeppelin 4. Zeppelin, it might have been House of the Holy. I think, or actually, it might have been written for this. I don't, because I remember Jimmy Page saying it was written at Headley Grange, and I don't think they went to Headley Grange for this. I can't remember actually. But yes, awesome song. Sick Again. 10 Years Gone. Amazing. Again, great guitar song for any guitar players. Trample Underfoot was the only time Zeppelin really released a single off this album, and you had to buy the album to get the single. They did the same thing with Stairway to Heaven on Zeppelin 4. It was the only way Zeppelin would release singles, because they were against releasing, because they thought the album should be listened to as a whole and not one song taken off and sort of distributed. That's my number 3. Physical Graffiti. Awesome album. I can't think of much more to say about it except, it's fantastic. Oh, another thing, it also came out my birthday, the 24th of February, although it came out a good 24 years before I was born. This was released on 24th of February 1975, and I was born 24th of February 1999. So, what did I say? 75. I don't know if I said 75. Well, I said 79. There you go. Number 3, physical graffiti. Number 2 is Zeppelin 2. This was the follow-up to the debut, and in my opinion, absolutely destroyed it. I know I said the debut still means a lot to me, and I still love it, and I do, but this blew it out of the water. Obviously, a whole lot of love. It's got my favourite Zeppelin song on it, What Is and What Should Never Be. And you got the real heavy bluesy Lemon song. And then you get contrast with Robert Plant, giving us a real sort of nice, sort of folky, sort of I Love You song to his wife at the time. Then we get back into the real heavy riffy stuff in Heartbreaker and Living, Loving Maid, She's Just a Woman. And then you got Moby Dick, which is essentially again a John Bonham drum solo bookended by a riff. Comes in with the riff, and then Bonham does his solo, and then they do the riff again, and then that ends the song. And then you got, of course, Bring It On Home, which again they basically stole from Willie Dixon and took credit for, but on these later releases they've actually sort of owned up and given the proper credits where it's needed. Although I think they Zeppelinized this massively. And also, I left out Ramble On, and the reason for that was because it was like What Is What Should Never Be was the first time we got this real light and shade sort of stuff that Zeppelin would become infamous for, that sort of quiet in the verses sort of thing, and then absolutely exploding in the choruses. And I love that. I think that's really the first band I really got those ideas from, was when, you know, you could just sort of strum lightly or just play this riff sort of quite lightly, then you get to the chorus, just absolutely bang it out, and, you know, play as loud and as heavy as you can, as opposed to just, you know, heavy intro, heavy verse, heavy chorus. You keep hitting them and pounding them, sometimes the audience just needs a break, and by the time, you know, that verse finishes, they're pretty much ready for the next chorus. So yeah, great follow-up. And then, yeah, I still love this album. It was among my favourite albums of all time, but it was overtaken the minute I heard my number 1, which obviously you should be able to guess by now, but that is Zeppelin 4, in my top 5 albums of all time, up there with Aerosmith Rocks and The Joshua Tree and Achtung Baby, which of course this channel is named after. What can I say about this that hasn't already been said? This is, you know, rock and roll brilliance, the height of sort of classic rock as we know it, I guess, even though it was done in 71 and we had a crap load more classic rock bands to come. But, you know, don't get me wrong, for me the first, from the 7, apart from Into the Outdoor and CODA, all these albums could contend for number 1, and they all did. I could easily tie all of these at number 1, but, you know, it's called a ranking for a reason. You've got to have certain albums in certain spots, and this album easily takes the top spot. You know, you got an album that has Black Dog, Rock and Roll. Sorry. You got Black Dog, Rock and Roll, The Battle of Evermore, Stairway to Heaven, Missy Mountain Hot, 4 Sticks, Going to California, and that absolutely pounding song When the Levee Breaks, which is probably one of my favourite Bonham tracks. And if you watch the documentary In Through the Outdoor, the documentary It Might Get Loud, you see Jimmy Page talking about how this song was recorded and how Bonzo had bought a new drum kit, and his tech set it up in the hall of Headley Grange, and he immediately just went and started, playing it, and it just created this massive echo and this huge sound, which immediately caught Page's ear and went, "We got to go and record that." And of course, When the Levee Breaks is another old sort of bluesy song. Awesome, really cool. What else? You got Going to California, which a lot of people either love or a lot of people hate. I love it. I think Going to California is a beautiful song, and it's it's Pagey using his folk stuff, and it's in different tunings, where most of a lot of those albums that Page did experiment with different tunings and stuff. I think this was actually the first album he actually properly did that. I think most of the songs are in standard tuning on the first three, and then you get to 4, and then you get Going to California, which is in I can't remember what it's in. It's in D, G, D, G, A, D. That might be wrong. But of course, what obviously sold this album, and you still hear on rock radio all the time, is Stairway to Heaven. One of the most overplayed rock songs, but if there's a rock song that I think deserves that title, it is Stairway. I'm not sick of Stairway, like a lot of people. I know anyone who's ever worked in a guitar shop is probably sick of Stairway to Heaven by now. But usually when you get sick of songs, it's because you hear a lot of people playing them, and usually it's a lot of people trying to mimic them and imitate them, and sort of, and they usually play it quite badly. That's usually with sort of my experiences with some of the songs that I'm completely sick of, which I can get to when I do those bands. But yeah, great record. In my top 5, you can't go past it. And if you're gonna, I think with anyone, if you're gonna start somewhere with Zeppelin, I think you start with this album, that or any of the first 4. But yet again, if you hear that Zeppelin's this big, great rock band, and you go on by 3, that's probably not the best starting. But go with 4, 2, or 1 if you're going to start somewhere with Zeppelin. Alright, that's my ranking for today. Thanks for watching. This again, like the Facebook page and the Instagram and the Twitter, and subscribe to the channel. That would be great. So thank you very much. See you later.